now, for under $4,000, you can have an ultrasound machine that's small enough and portable enough for your doctor to have it on them at all times. The doctor could potentially get the information that they need to diagnose the patient in real time, courtesy of a device that's affordable and could be on them immediately.
Welcome to the Emergent Podcast, where we interview product leaders from emerging technology companies about their work in the trenches to bring the hardest and most impactful technologies to life. Today's guest is Audrey Howell. Audrey is the Vice President of Product at BFLY Network, building point-of-care ultrasound devices and the software to make ultrasound more accessible. Prior to joining BFLY, Audrey spent over 5 years at Palantir Technologies, holding positions in a variety of product development functions. Audrey is a PhD in genetics, and before entering the tech industry, she was a biomedical researcher at Stanford and Duke universities. In this episode, Audrey and I discuss what it's like to be innovative at a public medical device company. We extensively cover tactics for respecting regulators while still moving fast, how to perform experimentation in heavily controlled settings, and we explore lots of interesting new use cases for ultrasound. We discuss how BFLY implements AI and focuses on keeping things explainable, and how it uses 2 versions of its app to test and mature ideas in different user settings. We also dive into how BFLY's core IP revolutionized the pricing and form factor for ultrasound, how simplicity has been a key theme even in this complex environment, and we cover the techniques Audrey uses to build trust with an incredibly wide range of stakeholders. Now a word from our sponsor. This episode is brought to you by Fount. Fount is a next-generation human performance company. This might seem hard to believe, but I've flown from Los Angeles to Tokyo and back with virtually no jet lag symptoms using Fount's FlyKit solution. I also used to commute bi-weekly across coasts, and Fount made me an ongoing intervention program that allowed me to feel in the moment and focus on my work on one coast and my family on the other. After successfully leveraging their kits, I decided to try the Concierge coaching program. I knew I had unusually high cholesterol, but I was already doing 95% of the interventions that doctors recommended, and I wasn't seeing results. With the support of a Fount tailored-to-me program, I've lowered these measurements to safe levels, finished my first Spartan race in the top 20%, and I feel at least as good as I did in my early 20s. Visit Fount.bio and use the coupon code EMERGENT to get 10% off any products, $150 off a deep dive with in-depth labs and a personalized plan, or $1,000 off Fount Pro, their most comprehensive and customized program, where you'll get a former special operator as a coach to optimize your physiology. Audrey, welcome to the show.
Hi, Adam. It's great to be here.
So let's set the stage a little bit. BFLY Network, as we know, builds portable ultrasound devices and the software for analyzing those complex images. But why does this matter? Most people only encounter ultrasound when they're thinking about scanning for babies. What about the approach that BFLY is taking is different? What are some of the use cases? Could you set the stage for us?
Absolutely. I feel like ultrasound, not just for babies, should be part of our secondary tagline here. As you said, most people encounter ultrasound for babies. Some people, unfortunately, might encounter it for heart imaging, where it's also really common when you want to be able to get a live picture of something that's moving. But the reality is, ultrasound can be used for a wide variety of clinical applications. And one of the things that's actually kind of limited its full utility and potential in the hospital has been that traditionally ultrasound carts have been these really large, expensive, cumbersome devices where, when you have this big, expensive device, you want to get as many possible uses for it as you can. So hospitals will concentrate them in their own special radiology suites. And to be a sonographer, you often need years of training because you're not just learning how to, actually use the machine, but you also have to learn ultrasound physics to understand for different parts of the body, what are the best ways to optimize the image. So the sad result of that is that ultrasound has kind of become a thing that most people associate with babies or maybe having somebody look at their heart. but it can be used in a wide variety of clinical use cases. So imagine, for example, if you're a parent, you take your kid into the doctor because they have some sort of respiratory infection, and you're trying to figure out, is this pneumonia or something that needs to be more severe, aggressively treated, or is it just, so they just have some sort of respiratory crud? Right now, as a parent, you might have to have a discussion with the doctor. Do I subject my kid to a lung x-ray, which is going to be exposure to ionizing radiation? When in reality, if a doctor had an ultrasound in their office, they could just pull it out, and in a couple minutes, they could very quickly know, is the lung sliding appropriately? Is there fluid in the lungs? Does it look like there's consolidation? Because it might indicate a more serious problem. So all of this information could be at the fingertips of a doctor if they just had it with them. But most people don't have it with them. So Butterfly's core innovation has been what we refer to as our ultrasound as chip technology. So most ultrasound devices use something called piezo crystals to generate the ultrasound waves. These piezo crystals, you have to grow special crystals to generate different types of ultrasound waves. So that's one of the reasons most ultrasound carts have all these different probes hanging off of them, because you often need different types of crystals to image different parts of the body. Butterfly's core innovation is to, instead of using piezo crystals, we have a silicon chip that's a 2D array of over 9,000 individually programmable elements. So using software, we can digitally program our transducer to generate the three different main types of ultrasound waves. So now, instead of having, this big cart that's got a bunch of different attachments hanging off of it, you can just have, a single probe where via software, once you plug it into a commercial off-the-shelf mobile device, you can generate the three major types of ultrasound waves, replacing that big cumbersome 3-probe cart. Additionally, we've dropped the price significantly. So now, for under $4,000, you can have an ultrasound machine that's small enough and portable enough for your doctor to have it on them at all times. So now you're talking about a situation where you're not having this delay of having to send somebody off to get an image. The doctor could potentially get the information that they need to diagnose the patient in real time, courtesy of a device that's affordable and could be on them immediately. You could even imagine something like, we have some people using this. You're in a car accident. So the ambulance comes up, the EMTs come to treat you. You've been in a bad accident. They're not sure. Maybe you have internal bleeding. If you have a portable ultrasound device with you, the EMT can quickly check, is there internal bleeding? Which, if you're in a rural setting, that could even change what hospital you take the patient to. It can change how quickly they're able to get care. And by making the device more accessible from both a size, portability, and price point, that's Butterfly's core innovation, is trying to just make it such that any doctor or a clinical practitioner could have an ultrasound device in their hand if they wanted to.
I love that. Sounds super impactful. Is one of the issues as well that once it's compact and can be in more different physical settings, it's also easier to use and requires a lower training burden? Or does it still require that same level of sophistication and training to operate the device?
Yeah, that's a great question. So our initial innovation was just the ultrasound probe. However, we've spent a lot of time on our software platform that goes with the ultrasound probe as well. And that involves both the mobile application that runs on the phone or tablet, which actually generates the ultrasound wave, where we've really tried to make that as mobile native as possible. So instead of needing to know all of this ultrasound physics and know how to change the focal depths of your image, the user can just select what part of the body they want to image, and we'll do the image optimization for them. We can change ultrasound characteristics on the fly because it's all digital. So as you change the depths, we can adjust everything for the user so that they don't have to have as much expertise in order to use the ultrasound device. In addition to the real time, we also have a cloud platform that enables administrators to sort of govern their ultrasound program. So they can keep track of the proficiency of their doctors. They can do quality assurance on the images. So it's not just making it easier for the doctors in real time, it's also providing the tools for the hospital so that they can ensure that all of their doctors are operating at a high level and that the hospital is appropriately getting to bill for the scans that are used clinically.
So you and I have collaborated in a couple of environments in the past, and I know you've had a few different big product roles at different companies with different focuses. But one of the things that stood out to me in our chats about BFLY is that there are a lot more stakeholders involved in this process with medical devices. Can you tell us a little bit about who those new stakeholders are in the medical device space and how you manage your relationships with them?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as any product manager, you're going to have the standard stakeholders that you think about: engineering, marketing, sales, commercial. But with a medical device, you get to add in a few extra layers. So one of those layers are design quality, which, you might be thinking, oh, I work with quality engineers all the time. This is actually different from software quality. So when you think about what are the best practices for building software, you want to define your user needs. Those flow to requirements. The requirements flow to tests so that you can prove that you've actually met your requirements. Everybody knows that that's the thing you're supposed to do. Part of the difference is in medical devices, you need to show your work. So you'll have an entire quality management system where you lay out, this is how we're going to build our products. This is how we're going to test that our products are right. This is how we're going to ensure that we're shipping things at high quality. And you not only are carrying out all of those steps, but there are requirements around documentation and maintaining sort of the proof for each of those steps. So the design quality engineers are really the ones helping you do that. They're the ones helping you maintain kind of the evidence that you've built your product in the right way and that you've tested and ensured that it's safe and effective. In addition to them, they're working closely with, as well, a regulatory team. So in other contexts, you might work with compliance or legal. It's like this similar concept, but it's a little bit, brought up a notch. So from regulatory, you're going to partner very closely with them so that they can help you interpret the regulations. And especially if you're an international company, the regulations for a medical device are going to be different depending on different geographies you want to go into. And sort of the requirements around, what is that documentation burden? What does that medical device registration look like? That's a really important factor when you're determining, which markets you go into, how much ongoing work there is for a product. They're really close partners to both help you understand the regulation to make sure you're building your product in a compliant way, but also sort of owning that communication with the regulators or notified bodies in different jurisdictions so that they can sort of speak their language. The next big sort of group of people that you don't necessarily find at other product development orgs are our clinical team. So at BFLY, we build products for trained healthcare providers. And our users are doctors, EMTs, trained healthcare providers who have been trained in ultrasound. So we have a clinical team that is embedded in the company who are people who have deep ultrasound experience. We have those sonographers who understand the ultrasound physics and the best way to optimize that image. And so that's sort of the fastest way you can get that real clinical experience in a really high quality, rapid feedback loop. Additionally, in many cases, your clinical team will also help to own your clinical research side. So a really important part of building a medical product is not just, sort of showing that you've got a product and you built it in the right way, but showing that it's clinically effective. And in order to do that, you've got to have the clinical studies to back that up. And your clinical partners are going to be the ones who sort of help make sure you've set up those studies in the right way so that you can back up the claims you want to make.
Yeah, in a way, it reminds me of government work in that the bar for getting the work done is much higher, but the rewards for doing the work are also fantastic in terms of the impact that you can have.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can be, front line in patient care decisions, but that comes with a lot of responsibility. And part of that responsibility is sort of making sure you're doing the right thing.
Let me ask this question. So we'll get to, what you can do to be as innovative as possible, even in these settings. But most startup discussions of regulated industries talk about how to cut the red tape. And I'm all for creative ways of doing that while still respecting the spirit of the regulations. But Can you help us build some empathy for the regulators in this industry? And then given that empathy, what are some lessons we can use when trying to ship innovative products in highly regulated spaces?
Yeah, absolutely. I think especially as we've looked at, people moving from tech into the medical device space, this is like, or even just like health tech in general, this is like a constant cultural friction point. And I think it's really important to remember that at the end of the day, like regulators aren't here to make your life more painful. They're here to make sure that what you're shipping is safe and effective. And unfortunately, the reality is before we collectively as a society had regulators, we didn't have the greatest track record in humanity in terms of like shipping things that were actually doing what they said they were going to do in healthcare. So, that's why we have these regulators in place, is to sort of help make sure that, what you're actually providing to patients or to doctors who are treating the patients are actually doing the right thing. I think it's also important to remember that like when you're talking with regulators, it's not one size fits all. Like they're taking a risk-based approach. So obviously, if as a product manager, your big idea is like, I want to implant something in somebody's brain, you're going to have a lot more oversight and there's going to be a lot more requirements than if you're building an app to help people with like their personal behavior modification to lead healthier lives. So it's really important as you're sort of entering the medical device and health tech space is to think about, what are the risks associated with your product? Like, what if something goes wrong? Like, what are the repercussions for your user, or in the case for your user as doctors, like what are the repercussions for the people that they're treating? If you have a bug, if something goes wrong. And that's when you really make friends with your regulatory and design quality partners to understand, on that risk spectrum, where do you fit? Just because you're in the health space doesn't mean you need to have all of the same controls and be governed by all of the same rules as somebody who has a brain implantable. But if you're interacting with like patient care in real time, you should expect that, if there's some sort of real potential for impact with your tool, there's also probably some potential for risk. And so you want to make sure that you understand where you fall in that risk spectrum. And you've worked with your partners to figure out which of the regulations, if any, are applicable to you. I think it's also important to remember that, especially as a company grows, like your first product is going to have one risk profile. But every product or every part of your product that you ship may not have the same risk profile. Like this is a kind of extreme example, but at BFLY, we sell an ultrasound probe. That's pretty clearly a medical device. Like there's no way around that. It's a medical device. However, we also ship a mobile application that's for educational use only. And we have engaged with regulators to ensure that we have the right rails around that so that it's used for education and not for clinical use. In the most extreme case, we have an e-commerce store at BFLY. We're a medical device company, but there's no way our e-commerce store is a medical device. So making sure you can sort of logically break up, what are all of the different things we want to do? What are the risks associated with each of them? And then working with your regulatory and like design quality partners to figure out, how can you parse that out so that you have the right level of controls and right level of engagement with regulators based on, how you could possibly segment your products.
Interesting. So in a way, it's not like in non-medical device startups where you're kind of trying to figure out how can you delicately break the rules. In this context, it's a little more like faster velocity comes from faster collaboration and better mutual understanding, but also architecting a setup where the things that are in the clinical setting stay in the clinical setting, and the things that are maybe higher up in your funnel but are more educational are outside of that clinical setting. And so there's different tiers that you're operating in terms of how much regulation there is for different portions of the product. Is that accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd say sort of that I don't know how many people still ascribe to this belief, but that move fast, break things mentality, make sure that's limited to the things that don't touch patient care and don't have, real clinical risks associated with them. Like, if you're going to break something, know the repercussions of that.
Yeah, nobody wants to be the next Theranos. So that's certainly not what any of us are aspiring to. In this complicated setting, with all of these stakeholders and all of these regulations, but also the patient at the center of it and making sure that their care is provided for, how do you test a new product hypothesis? Like, what does that look like inside of Butterfly Network?
Yeah, you definitely can still do it. It's, if you're talking about something like if you've established that your product is a legit medical device, testing is going to be a little bit harder than just throwing out an A/B test. So that's where that close collaboration and partnership with your clinical friends to set up like really robust clinical protocols it's really going to benefit you. So if you want to use uncleared software, you can't just throw that out in the world and test it. But what you can do is work with an institutional review board to set up a protocol that says, hey, here's our experimental device, here's our risks associated with it, here's what we want to test, here's the net benefit or not to the patient. And you sort of justify why the risks associated with participating in the study are net worth it. In many cases, if you have a device that's low risk, that's a very easy argument to make. What I would say is once you have that appropriate IRB protocol set up, then that can allow for quick iteration. When you bring up institutional review boards, sometimes people get a little nervous because, at major academic medical centers, they're notoriously slow for setting up these IRBs. They've got a lot of them to consider. The people on the board may be also just professors and doctors in their life. This is just a thing they're doing on the side. And so one thing we've had success with is, where appropriate, working with doctors in private practice and third-party institutional review boards. So for example, one of the products we were working on was that we've released is our automated bladder volume tool. So one of the prime user groups for an auto bladder volume calculator are urologists. They do this bladder volume calculation day in, day out. The great news is that urologists, a lot of them are in standalone private practices, which means they have a little bit more flexibility in terms of their time and scheduling and their resources and their ability to work with potential third-party institutional review boards. They're a little bit more flexible, which means you can set up some arrangements that are still fully compliant, still covered by an institutional review board protocol, but you can be a little bit more agile than if you're trying to work with the major medical center where it takes 8 months for somebody to even review your protocol, for example.
Yeah, so you're kind of tiering the user segments based on the amount of activation energy required to begin a test in the first place in order to test a hypothesis a little bit earlier in the cycle. Did I get that right?
I think sometimes, you do still have to make sure you have the right users for the tool that you're building. So in this case, private practice, that was one of our major user groups. And so it was really possible to do this. If you have a situation where, you really want to work in something that just has to happen in a major academic medical center, you're working with the major academic medical center, and you do need to make sure that you're doing what's the most appropriate testing for your product at the end of the day.
This episode is brought to you by Propel Auth. Startups and corporate innovation teams routinely waste months building core user authentication and authorization flows into their products. Propel Auth has automated all the most important pieces of the user management lifecycle. Instantly set up wait lists, magic links, social login, user impersonation, user management, role-based access control, SAML integrations for enterprise, team management, and much more. With Propel Auth, each of these challenges takes just a few lines of code instead of months of development and integration time. And with thoughtful control over design and skinning, it's easy to keep your product fully on brand.
Get a generous free starter pack that scales through 1,000 monthly active users, or mention Emergent25 to receive 25% off for the first 6 months for more mature products. Get back to building your actual product and let Propel Auth handle your user management needs. Visit Propel Auth, that's PROPELAUTH.com to learn more.
This raises an interesting question because there's obviously a lot of effort required to set up even these like slightly less intense institutional review board settings. And I always kind of joke with people that there's two types of tests that you can conduct in the market for a product. One of them is very documentation heavy, and you're really internally stress testing the idea by trying to write out your assumptions and what you expect it to look like and who the users are and all those different things. There's 100 different names for these documents. And then there's actual testing on actual users where you get real feedback from the market. Do you guys have to spend a lot more time on some of those documents in order to, avoid wasting cycles on full IRB approval for ideas that are like less baked? Do you spend more time there?
Yeah, there is a lot more sort of upfront work in the vetting your ideas, working with your clinical partners, doing interviews with like your target user population where they're maybe not able to actually use the tool, but you're showing them mocks. Or in some cases, it's really nice that, there are definitely cases where at the end of the day, you want somebody actually using your end to end the way you want it to be used. But especially when you are validating those very early ideas, you can fake it. Like, you can have, interactive mocks or an app that just generates a fake image. And so it's not actually live imaging a person. So if you can remove some of that risk, then you can, for example, have, your target user population. Me and my team were based in New York City. There's a lot of doctors in New York City. You can have people come into the office, give you feedback, sometimes even look and touch the probe. But, if you have the appropriate rails in place, if they're not actually live imaging a person, then you can kind of let them interact with the product as much as they can without actually having that end-to-end thing in place.
Well, and for your product, since ultrasound waves are invisible to the human eye, there's probably not that much lost in the feeling of that experience, right?
Yeah, depending on how good your mock is, and your, you can insert a video, and it's not 100% the same as a person actually like responding to probe movements, but especially if you just want to get feedback on sort of like the app interactions, then yeah, if you can remove the patient from the equation, then you have more flexibility to get feedback from the doctors.
So how is BFLY leveraging AI technologies, and how are you guys dealing with the uncertainty around the analysis that those technologies produce, specifically in the user experience in these high stakes settings?
Yeah, so, I joked about BFLY's unofficial tagline being ultrasound not just for babies. Our official tagline is democratizing medical imaging. And to do that,
I will expect royalties for the first of those.
Thank you.
taglines.
Yes, if we pass that on to market. When it comes to actually getting ultrasound in the hands of doctors, a lot of them, to make it more accessible, you do need to have these tools that will help them get to a diagnostic quality image faster and to help them interpret that image faster. So we have two kind of layers in AI at BFLY. We have our pure educational AI, and that lives in our educational use only application called ScanLab. So ScanLab is a totally separate mobile application. It's really intended for like medical students because, and people who are sort of learning ultrasound, because it used to be you went to medical school, you didn't learn ultrasound because you had sonographers for that. That's changing. Now, medical students, when they go to medical school, they're learning how to do point-of-care ultrasound in their medical education. And so we built an entire mobile application which helps give them real-time feedback so that, as they're scanning in these lab settings, they can get that feedback of, hey, here's the anatomy I can identify on the screen for you. here's like some feedback on the potential diagnostic quality of your image, and that can update live for them as they're moving the probe. So that's what I consider sort of our more educational AI. And when it comes to that, we try to explain as much as possible where things are coming from. So when it comes to the anatomical labeling, you can sort of see like, these are the outlines. This is where we've decided to call, a rib, for example. When it comes to the actual clinical AI that's deployed in our clinical app, where that is used in treatment decisions, we kind of have done that in a couple of different ways. That idea of like explicable AI is really important to us at Butterfly. So there's a lot of people who engage in what we think of as like black box AI. And I think in many cases, like that AI can be really, really good. There's so many things that, an algorithm can potentially pick up that are so nuanced and subtle to the human eye that you can have something that you put an image in and just get an answer out. I believe those algorithms are real. The problem you have with that is exactly what you called out. It's like, well, if the doctor doesn't know why the algorithm said what it said, it's hard to fully trust it. So in the cases of both of our cleared and released AIs, we've tried to, as much as possible, make them explicable and understandable. So in the case of our bladder volume calculator, we have an algorithm, there's also an advanced imaging feature that's going to take a 3-dimensional sweep through the bladder without the doctor having to move the probe. So we actually show the doctor real time how it's stepping through the bladder so that they can see each of the planes that are being captured. We also then, in the end, will show them, where was the bladder identified in each of those individual planes so that they can judge for themselves, was that identification appropriate? And so all of that feeds into giving a number. We also just, as that sort of secondary metric, it's a non-clinical feature, but because we have this 3D sweep, we also generate a 3D reconstruction. So then the doctor doesn't have to sort of do that mental gymnastics of, okay, what did that bladder look like? They can see a 3D reconstruction, which enables them to better sort of understand, do I think I got the whole bladder? Does it look like the bladder? Does it look like there's maybe something going on? And so we try to provide as many of those sort of prompts as we can within the context of like our auto bladder volume tool. The same is true for our auto B-line counter. So B-lines are actually an ultrasound artifact that shows up in your lungs when you start to get fluid in your lungs. Unlike most of the things you look at in ultrasound, they're not a real structure. It's an artifact that gets generated by the interaction of the ultrasound waves and the fluid in your lungs. So the number of B-lines correlates with the amount of fluid in your lungs. So we have a tool that'll count the B-lines for you. And doctors understand roughly, the correlation between number of B-lines and amount of fluid in the lungs, and their thresholds for, hey, if you've got this many B-lines, you probably need to investigate sort of the sources of fluid for this patient. And so for this, we're producing the number, but then we're also going through and highlighting every single B-line we've counted and showing that to the user. And in some cases, giving the user the option at the end to overrule us. So if the clinician looks at our result, they've decided in their clinical judgment, they disagree with our outcome, they can actually edit the result. That'll clear sort of the AI-generated results, but the doctor can still go along their workflow with their documentation. So they can choose to accept our sort of AI-generated result with its full sort of evidence for why we gave them the number that we gave them, or they can decide if in their clinical evidence they disagree with it, they can overrule us and keep moving.
Wow. I've never used an ultrasound machine, but having sat next to one, it must feel like using a Stone Age product compared to that level of interactivity while you're doing the scan and 3D recompositions of things and feedback in the loop. That's really awesome what you guys have put together there. If you'll permit me, I'm going to take this in a strange direction because As you know, some of our other guests are focused on overhead sensing and satellite imagery. And to me, there's a really interesting parallel here. I don't know if you agree with this or not, but a lot of the challenge in that industry is making the pixels from different types of overhead sensors available and easy to understand for regular users. For example, not everybody knows that synthetic aperture radar can see through clouds and it can see at night, but they are able to recognize that the radar is bouncing off of a bridge and it shows, roughly speaking, the structure of a bridge. You guys have a similar complexity. You've got different modes that you're scanning in, B mode, color Doppler, biplane. How do you make those terms and modalities intuitive to users who aren't medical doctors, perhaps on the educational side?
Yeah, so the first thing I have to say is we are for medical doctors. So our users do have to be trained healthcare providers, medical students actively undergoing training under the supervision of a doctor. So at the moment, we don't necessarily have to be as concerned about interpreting that for an end user. However, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of doctors were not trained in ultrasound early in their careers. And so they're learning it now as residents, as fellows, or even as, sort of established doctors who are now trying to embrace the technology as they see, younger doctors adopting it, and they're learning it in continuing medical education courses. So I'd say we've approached this from a couple of different directions. In the core product, we have really tried to make the product as walk-up accessible and easy to use as possible. As I mentioned earlier, we have over 20 different presets for different types, different parts of the body. So on a traditional ultrasound cart, you look at the patient, you're like, okay, I need to image, their heart. You then have to do the math of, or do the logic of, I'm going to image their heart, therefore I'm going to use a phased array probe. So I got to pull out that probe, plug it into the device. So one of the main things we've done in terms of making it easier in real time for the doctors is sort of removing a little bit of that sort of cognitive overload by just asking them, what part of the body do you want to image? You tell us what part of the body you want to image. We'll optimize the image for you. And then, they can still adjust the image. They can adjust depth, they can adjust gain. There's a few other sort of more fine grain adjustments that they can make. But then it's all mobile native. They can just swipe to change the depth, swipe left and right to change the gain. And so we've tried to make it just as approachable as possible. When it comes to just the pure education front, that's where we have ScanLab. And so that's where, in addition to providing the AI functionality in ScanLab, we've also sort of reoriented it so that the users are actually pursuing defined clinical workflows. And so we step by step take them through the workflow. So if they, select a limited cardiac scan, for example, tell them, okay, the first view in this limited cardiac scan today is going to be the parasternal long axis view. Here's an animation showing you where to place the probe. Here's some text describing to you, how you want to move the probe to get that right image. Here's a sample image of this is the target image you're looking for, complete with the anatomy you should be able to see. And then we provide that supportive AI in real time. Those are some of the main product features. I will also say we have a more traditional didactic SaaS platform like Butterfly Academy. So if you are in a more formalized setting, you can take courses where, we'll walk you through what are the clinical use cases, how do you acquire these views. I know we're on a product podcast, but you also have to consider that sometimes you need supportive work in addition to your product. Doctors are used to learning things hands-on. So we have sort of a certified services training program where if a hospital wants to help integrate ultrasound into their workflows, we have all of these product supports. But at the end of the day, what they really want is somebody to come on site and show them what to do. We'll help them do that so that they feel more confident and have sort of that base groundwork to then be able to use our products in real time.
This episode is brought to you by Tonic AI. Tonic intelligently transforms your sensitive production data into realistic test data that's safe to use across your lower environments to accelerate your engineering velocity while safeguarding data privacy. We've all experienced the pain and wasted cost of building features with unrealistic data in staging your development environments. Mismatches between prod and test data lead to costly bugs in production, poor user experience, and when it comes to RAG or LLM applications, even incorrect answers. Moreover, as the data scale increases, it becomes difficult for developers to test their features with high fidelity. Tonic's products streamline data synthesis, subsetting, and provisioning to get developers the realistic data they need when and where they need it. Get on-demand access to safe, high-fidelity versions of your structured, semi-structured, or free text data to shorten sprints, catch more bugs, and ship better products faster. Visit tonic.ai/emergent to learn more and receive 15% off in your first year. You probably know this about me, but I have a very wide view of what counts as product. And so to me, anything that supports the experience, those other people may be part of the discipline or better at it. It's all part of that experience. I'm very much in that philosophy. So one of the things that I think is really fascinating is the super earliest stage of companies and finding product market fit and defining killer features. But I also think it's really interesting when companies get more mature, like in your case, Butterfly Network is a public company that has sold on the order of 100,000 devices. And you've been responsible for generation 3 over the last little bit. The product's already been out there, right? People already understand the basic package. How do you decide what are the compelling use cases to target for it? And I'll give a funny example while you're thinking. Apple's obviously even more mature, but I posted on X a while back. They had a new release, and their number one feature was something like, we have new fonts in the operating system. It's just like entirely underwhelming, but it is a real problem as your product matures. How do you continue to find stuff that's really exciting to target?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'd say one of the things that's made that a little bit easier for me and for Butterfly is that the point of care ultrasound market itself is evolving. So certainly, as we take that step back, the sort of Apple march of, there's going to be another generation of device and it's going to get better over time. That's also been really important to us, especially as we develop this ultrasound and chip technology. One of the reasons we really went in deep on generating our own silicon chips is because we knew that it was going to be possible to really continue innovating and improving sort of the technological output we could get out of our transducer element. So one just sort of, I don't want to say basic because it's a lot of work by a lot of very, very smart people. But one just sort of truism is that, our probes have gotten better over time. We have had improved image quality in a variety of different presets, and just knowing that each generation of the device, you're going to get better image quality. Ultrasound has existed for a long time, and there's a huge spectrum of ultrasound devices on the market. So you can go down to, handheld devices like ours that have traditionally been viewed as having not as nice image quality, up to sort of the entry-level carts, which have also kind of had okay image quality. But, if you really want to splash out on, and spend a couple $100,000, you can get something that has really beautiful image quality. So we do believe that there's always gains to be made just in the core technology and what we can do in the small, portable, affordable point of care device. So that's sort of just like table stakes. You always want to make it better. But as you were talking about, how do you prioritize those features? One of the things that we like to keep in mind is, I talked a little bit before about how, it used to be that medical students weren't taught ultrasound. So point of care ultrasound was really embraced and championed by doctors in the emergency and critical care spaces. which makes sense. Those are the people for whom, time is often the most important factor in their ability to make good decisions for their patients, as well as they often have patients where you can't just be like, okay, I'm going to send you off to radiology. I'll see you in a couple hours when you get back. So they've been the ones to really champion point of care ultrasound. And so, initially, those were really our target users. That's who you want to build features for. And those are still the people we want to make sure every time we release a new generation of our device, that we have something else that's going to make their lives easier, delight them as well. However, as that's happening in the background and we're making a really amazing device for the traditional point of care users, other specialties have understood now the importance of ultrasound. And they're starting to mandate that their residents and students need to learn this as well. And they're at a very different sort of phase in their ultrasound adoption, which means that, now family medicine residency programs are mandating that ultrasound be part of the curriculum. So making sure, we now have a bunch of people who run family medicine residency programs. They've been running these programs for years, but now all of a sudden they have to integrate something new into their program. So how can we give them the right tools, both from an imaging perspective, but also as our SaaS platform evolves over time? How do we make sure that they get the right tools and support so that they can adopt ultrasound, so that they can make sure that all of their students are learning how to image, how to incorporate it into their care paths? So that's why we've actually spent a lot of time as well as our probe has evolving our SaaS platform so that we have these nice automated dashboards for managing proficiency so that residency programs can keep track of how many scans each of their residents have done. We have great features for providing quality assurance so that, as you're a learning person, your images get reviewed by a more senior doctor who can provide you feedback on how well you acquired the image and how well you interpreted the image. And that's been really as important to make sure that our SaaS platform can keep up with it as it has been to sort of improve the generations of our probe itself.
Okay, you're truly crossing the chasm into users that maybe don't have quite as a hair on fire use case, but could very much benefit from the technology. It makes me think about the different parts of the body and the markets, and especially your comment about, hey, you could buy a multi-$100,000 device and get a really, really exquisite image. But I suspect that you in particular, leading product, have to think a little bit about, for particular parts of the body, what's the ROI? Will the scan at a particular resolution drive significant enough diagnostic value in that clinical setting to warrant using, the BFLY device versus waiting 4 weeks for a multi-$100,000 image? Like, how have you decided which parts of the body to go after and which ones are just not sustainable for this growth phase?
Yeah, I'd say in many cases, the parts of the body often correlate with the specialties and the doctors you're trying to serve. It's not a perfect correlation because some specialties really do sort of look at all parts of the body. But generally speaking, there are, anatomies that correlate with different specialties, So for example, we talked about our auto bladder volume tool. That's a really big deal for urologists. It's useful for other people as well, but it's a really big deal for them. So certainly the specialties play a large role in figuring out sort of which views and which presets we're optimizing. I'd also say if you want to get really anatomical, our probe right now is only used for transthoracic, transabdominal. So putting the probe outside. There are ultrasound probes that will go inside of your body. For the time being, that's not a probe that BFLY is building. There is definitely a market for that, but that has not thus far been sort of the priority for our product development. And so we think that There's plenty of parts of the body and plenty of clinical questions you can answer by, keeping the probe outside the stomach and outside the abdomen. So at a very sort of big level, that's one of the kind of major anatomical choices we've made so far as a company.
Do you have any insights you can share on how you've paired with marketing? I know this is a more complex topic for devices since certain aspects can't really be advertised in the same ways that you might with, say, a traditional SaaS tool that doesn't touch the medical domain.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that marketing, that interaction is similarly, you want to make sure that you and marketing are also in sync with those cross-functional parties to understand, what you can and cannot say. And depending on what parts of the product you're talking about, you might need more or less like concrete evidence that you can point to. So obviously, if you want to make a claim about clinical performance of your product, you better be able to back that up. So we do work closely with marketing to make sure that we sort of know what claims we want to be able to make and what sort of statements they want to be able to make well in advance, so that if necessary, we can do the right studies in order to justify those claims. I'd also say that BFLY has had a very different relationship with marketing than I think many medical device companies have, because most medical devices are bought either through a distributor or they're sort of bought by, there might be a website for the company and it says, contact your local sales representative. We have direct sales representatives who are working with, large institutions and hospitals, but we also have the somewhat innovative practice of having an e-com store. So we sell direct to doctors on e-commerce, which means that we're often marketing direct to doctors in a way that, and in venues that other medical devices don't necessarily use as much. We have a heavy presence in social media marketing, which has not traditionally been as prominent of a channel for some traditional medical device manufacturers.
I mean, I wouldn't know because I'm not a doctor, but I'm guessing you don't see many, here's a new heart valve treatment that you can use when you're scrolling on your TikTok, right?
Not usually on, social media.
So what comes next for BFLY's product?
Yeah, it's exciting times. So for anyone listening, as you said, we are a public company. I'd encourage you to look at our investor relations website, where we do have a link to an Investor Day presentation that we recently gave that gave a bit more of an overview. But I think just in terms of what we can quickly cover here, I mentioned constant technological innovation. That's definitely still one of our highest priorities. Can we be constantly evolving and improving our chip and transducer to have the best quality ultrasound that we possibly can? That's definitely something we're working on. One thing we didn't really touch on earlier is that BFLY has its own in-house developed AI. However, we've also launched a partnership platform that we call the BFLY Garden, where third-party AI developers can use our SDKs to develop and launch AI tools on our platform for BFLY users. So we've had some great response to that. We launched our first educational use partnership a little bit ago with a company called ThinkSono, and we look forward to sort of growing that partnership space quite a bit, because there's a ton of companies out there that have a driving purpose to build AI for one specific thing. And we'd love to have a great platform that makes it possible for them to reach doctors.
Yeah, it's always fun to see what people build on top of your platform.
And then we have also announced that we are starting to explore and open partnerships in the home care space. So right now, that is primarily for, or that is for trained healthcare providers to go into the patient's home. But I think we all saw in the wake of the pandemic a shift in sort of where clinical care was delivered. We also believe that our probe being highly portable and affordable represents a really great opportunity to sort of meet people where they are and to try to provide more actionable information without them necessarily having to come into the hospital frequently.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, this has been so much fun. How can listeners get in touch with you if they want to follow up?
Yeah, you can email me at ahowell@butterflynetwork.com or check out our website and social media feeds to see all of the good stuff we're putting out there.
Awesome. Thank you so much for spending time with us today talking about this awesome technology. I really appreciate it, Audrey.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's great fun.
Thank you so much for listening. Emergent is brought to you by First Principles, where we provide emerging technology product coaching and fractional product leadership to founders with bold visions. If you found this valuable, you can subscribe on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. Please consider leaving a review or sharing feedback directly with us. You can always find previous episodes, show notes, and more content on www.emergentproduct.com.